Hello, this is MJR RPG. The following review is of the Delta Green community scenario, Telling the Bees, written by Charles Perryman for the 2021 Shotgun Scenario Contest. As always, the first chunk of this review is largely spoiler light, while the second half is completely full of spoilers, so I will warn off any players before beginning that. In short, Telling the Bees is a weird but easy to run little scenario with enough tools to adjust complexity and lethality without much extra work. As a community-written shotgun scenario, Telling the Bees is short, bare bones, and lacking any pretext of production values. It is pure game text. While I've only played a few shotgun scenarios at the time of writing this, and I've only been running Delta Green for a few months overall, compared to many of the others I've read, Telling the Bees is among the more structured, while still being open and easily tunable without much in the way of elaborate scripting. Many shotgun scenarios read as a series of vague ideas that a handler could build their own scenario around, which isn't necessarily a negative thing, and can be very effective when done well. There is a fine balance, and Telling the Bees strikes that balance. A handler can mostly run the scenario straight from the text without extra work, and I indeed ran it while reading it, as I found myself suddenly running Delta Green after making a split-second decision to bail on our long-running WFRP campaign, and this was only one of two scenarios I'd actually played before in Delta Green. Yet, as there are little scripted scenes, every group should have a quite different run of it, as players are given free rein from the start, and the handlers are given room for their own interpretation of many events and NPC interactions. This also gives handlers some easy levers to pull to adjust complexity, lethality, and the overall mood on the fly, once again without needing to put much effort into extra preparation. There are a few odd mechanical gubbins that don't quite work as seem intended, and a handful of sections that are a touch rough around the edges. The intro in particular is a bit flat, but that might be more of a personal reoccurring issue with Delta Green scenarios in general, as in, get a briefing, head off into the investigation. The Delta Green version of Call of Cthulhu's You Meet a Guy in His Office, boilerplate standard issue opening. I chalk these up to a possible lack of playtesting and trying to adhere to a strict word count, with the 1,700-ish words, including stats, leaving most locations and NPCs with only a sentence or two of description. Keeping a consistent tone is appreciated, though, as quite a few of the shotgun scenarios I read wobbled on, with in-jokes and awkward tone lurches popping up amid informal text. Telling the Bees is straight-faced, weird, and subtly quite horrifying. Telling the Bees may not be a good first operation for a new Delta Green group, like I did, as while it is a fairly straightforward investigation, it does feel like the intent was to shake up the standard procedure a little bit. For a group with a few operations under their belts, Telling the Bees makes for an easy but intriguing little one-shot. Telling the Bees can be found online on the Fairfield Project, Delta Green Wiki, or the original Google Doc, which is probably the easiest to read and/or print out. The following section is full of spoilers, so if you are a player or just don't want to know what's going on, I would suggest stopping here. Telling the Bees is about space bees, Alzheimer's, and the Welsh. Joking, sort of, the Welsh only feature tangentially. Space bees with a gestalt consciousness of dementia-ridden Welsh wizards is indeed the scenario's premise. Centuries ago, a wizard, who was Welsh, not an important point, but one that must be made, struck a deal with some space bees to give his body, and his descendants' bodies, to the swarm as hosts in exchange for the swarm preserving his consciousness over generations. Eventually, the wizard's line died out, but the dementia-ridden consciousness lives on in the oblivious space bee swarm. Super weird, and pretty awful when you think about it for a bit. Or better, if an agent is stung by one of the space bees, forcing them to directly deal with the weird premise. As with most Delta Green operations, the party is called to action by a literal call to action through their case officer. In this case, they are to investigate a comatose man in a hospital, after he made a 911 call in which he babbled madly in multiple languages, including a decidedly mythosy one. This man was unluckily stung by one of the hostless space bees, infecting him with the decaying gestalt consciousness. Your standard investigating can lead the party from there to a handful of locations and NPCs for more information, and eventually to the swarm, now housing itself in two unfortunate beekeepers. Nothing really fixes the route of investigation, with a couple leads given right off the bat, and in my run the party ended up visiting the quote-unquote final location before most of the other places. This worked out fine, and I see no reason to force the party towards the initial clues. The final confrontation is also completely open, with a whopping 2 sentences given to it. Again, this works pretty well. though I wouldn't mind a little bit more fleshing out on how the space bees may react to certain situations. For example, the text suggests the bees can be persuaded to wander off across the cosmos if they are convinced the Welsh wizard's family line is dead. To make things difficult, the bees don't understand individuality, death, or apparently any language besides Aklo. The last point is a bit odd, given the bees have been combining their hive mind with the Welsh and English-speaking wizards for 2 centuries. A fairly easy issue to pave over by simply allowing the hive to communicate in whatever language seems necessary, maybe with Aklo being the clearest way to bypass the dementia wizards and speak directly with the space bees. That's a great sentence. Telling the bees is also one of the few Delta Green, or even Call of Cthulhu scenarios, that leans towards a non-violent solution. It's a bit difficult to shoot your way through a swarm of bees, much less alien space bees. Players being players, they can of course find a way to murder their way out of anything, but it's also nice for a scenario to hint towards other courses of less bloody action. I first played through the scenario before running it, and in that run we simply talked the bees into buggering off. In my run, I tipped the scales a bit by following a time-sensitive suggestion to have the current host of the bees be wandering around in a dementia haze during the evenings. This puts a large barrier in the way of easy communication, as few parties are likely to come back later when the haze lifts, and even less likely to remain peaceful when bees start bursting out of the beekeeper's skin. One potential idea to balance the probabilities of violence with the ease of communication could be to give the beekeeper couple a son or daughter, also infected, who has an opposite schedule as their mother. This way the party should always encounter one person in a confused daze stumbling around the property, and one that can be talked to. For some added threat, give one of the beekeepers a shotgun. Outside of that, the only other main suggestion I have would be for keepers to do their damnedest to have an agent stung by a bee, and to adjust the pace of these sting effects. Once stung, the agent suffers visions from the wizards and bees' pasts. As written, the hive mind affects the agent once a day, but the scenario isn't likely to run that long, and most players would figure out quickly their agent should remove the stinger to stop the spread of the Gestalt Welsh. Increasing the roll on the effect table to once a scene or once an hour is a good first step, but I would go further by having the Gestalt consciousness be immediately and permanently transferred, but at a very low and very subconscious level. Besides the initial effect once stung, I had the effect table become an option for the agent during home scenes, allowing them to dive into the memories for random skill increases, but with the risk of sand losses, and increasing the awareness of the infection. Annoyingly, that agent died 2 operations later, but I could see the growing Welsh possession being very fun to play with over a longer campaign. Overall, Telling the Bees is a very fun little scenario with lots of opportunities to up the weirdness without the usual bloodshed and trunkfuls of dead agents. Potentially. Telling the Bees can be found online on the Fairfield Project, Delta Green Wiki, or in the original Google Doc. As always, thank you for listening. Credit to Cryochamber for use of their album Cthulhu. Until next time, have a good one.